Oops. Okay, good morning. We are back in action. Another week of school, but not in school. Super happy to be able to look at one of my favorite topics in the cells and systems unit, and that is what the structures and the functions are of the organelles. So we're going to look at the organelles today, start with all the structures that are inside the cell, and a little bit of bad news. Over the weekend, I'm sure you heard about this guy. I'm sure you heard about Dustin Bufflin, and he is officially no longer a Winnipeg Jet. This is my Dustin Bufflin bobblehead. I got this about 4 years ago, kept it in the package, haven't opened it, and now it's going to be worth money. It's going to be worth money. So goodbye, Big Buff. We're sad to see you go, but all good things must come to an end. All right. So I'm going to share my screen with you. This PowerPoint is on the Google Classroom. We're going to look at the organelles. Now, if you remember the way that we introduced the whole unit, we looked at the way living things are organized. And living things are organized in, hold on a second. Is this recording? Oh, man. Oh, man. Technical difficulties. Yeah, living things are organized in there we go. This is what I'm after. There we go. Living things are organized in a way in different levels. And as you go up the levels, you go up in terms of complexity. Well, we're actually going backwards in one level. We're taking a cell, and we're going to look at some of the things that you would see if you were to look under a microscope. If you were going to look under a microscope, what are some of the structures you would see, and what are their jobs? So for today, your learning goal is number one, to learn the names of the organelles, the structures inside the cell. And number two, your second learning goal is to learn what their basic job and function is. Okay, so two learning goals for this first part of the lesson. What would we see under the microscope? So first of all, we're going to start with three structures that all have to do with the central part of any cell. And those are the nucleus, the nucleolus, and the nuclear membrane. As we go along today, one of the things I want you to really pay attention to are the analogies that I'm going to be using. You know that I love analogies and the best at times, and I'm going to be looking at some of these analogies as we go through. And I really want you to pay attention to those because you're going to need to think in terms of analogies for the major assignment that goes along with this section. So this section is going to take us probably about 2 weeks to complete all the tasks, and a lot of your time is going to be spent working on one of the major projects. I'm not sure how I'm going to collect that information from you yet, but you will have to pour a lot of attention and time into it. So let's get started, and we talk about the cells. The very first structure that we want to talk about is the nucleus. So the nucleus is responsible for controlling all the activities in the cell and stores the genetic information inside the cell. So every cell, whether it's, let's say, a nerve cell or a muscle cell, maybe a lymphatic cell, they have their own nucleus. And the nucleus is what we could kind of call the command center of the cell, maybe the headquarters. So if you think about an army going out to face another army or to complete a task, the nucleus would be like the headquarters of that army. Nothing gets done in the cell without getting information from the headquarters. So there's my first analogy. I need a little drink of coffee. Sorry. Today's coffee mug, by the way, is my St. John's High School mug. I don't know if you can see that. St. John's High School, used to work there, had some great times. Shout out to St. John's. I don't know if you can see that. The tiger is the mascot. You may want to pay attention to that later. So the nucleus is the command center, the headquarters of the cell. It's involved in making sure that all the instructions and the proper functions for each specific type of cell get done. So if you remember, the cells are the building blocks of living things, and without information from the nucleus, that cell will not know what job it's supposed to perform. The nucleolus, so here's a picture of a nucleus. This is under a compound microscope. These are actually plant cells. You can tell they're plant cells because they have more of a boxy kind of rectangular shape. And if you take a look right on the inside here, these structures are nuclei inside a cell. So that would be what you would see under a compound microscope. Usually the nucleus is the very first thing that you're going to see. And in these cells, if you look really closely, you can see these condensed, darker balls, it looks like. Here there's two, here there's two, here there's only one, but it's got this line split in the middle. That's more than likely because these cells are about to go under cell division. This one, probably not yet. Those little balls, those condensed kind of inner parts of the nucleus are what we call the nucleolus. So the nucleolus has all the genetic material. So the DNA or the chromosomes of living things are hidden in the nucleus, and inside of that nucleus, there's a nucleolus, and that's where the DNA is, the chromosomes, the genetic material. So when traits are passed on from one living thing to another, it's the nucleolus that has all that genetic information captured within it. So if the nucleus was kind of like headquarters, you could probably think of the nucleolus as being the maybe a safe where all the top secret instructions are kept at headquarters. Another analogy. If we go along, here's a electron microscope view of a nucleus. So this is one nucleus. They're not always completely circular. Within it is a nucleolus, and around the outside is the nuclear membrane. So if you go around here, you can see this. Now this is seen under extreme magnification. That's within one cell. And it would probably be very easy to spot that. Now, most of the time when we talk about cell structures and functions, we're talking about the tiny little pieces that make up the cells. Okay, those are called organelles. I lost my train of thought. What was I going to mention? I can't remember. Oh yeah, some of these can be seen under a compound microscope, like the type we look at school. Others are so small though, you would need electron microscopes. The other thing I want you to remember is a cell is three-dimensional, kind of like, here it is, head prop ready, kind of like this baseball. So this baseball is a sphere, it's three-dimensional. But when we draw them, most of the time we're drawing like a cross section, so we're cutting through and looking at one flat piece of a cell as though we cross-sectioned right through the middle like the equator, opened it up, what would we see? And that's why when we use microscopes, sometimes we see overlapping cells because we've taken a section of, let's say, an onion, and we've cut through lots of different cells. So sometimes it can appear that cells have more than one nucleus, but really they just have one. And that's because of the overlapping in 2D when we look at it on a microscope. Moving on, here are some red blood cells. I'm just wondering if you can spot the nuclei in these red blood cells. Now, if you see these three slides, you should probably take a look at these and you should be thinking, okay, what type of microscope is this being viewed under? So it looks like it's three-dimensional, and these are living tissues. Can you stop for a minute and think about your microscope assignment? Would this be a picture of a compound light microscope, a scanning electron microscope, or a transmission electron microscope? I'll leave that with you. Now, there's a couple of things that we talk about, and because they're not really structures within the cells, but we still want to group them as important parts. And those two structures are the cytoplasm and the cell membrane. So the cytoplasm is kind of like the, if you were thinking of an analogy again for these two together, you could picture the cell membrane as being a balloon. And on the balloon, it's got the plastic, the actual material of the balloon would be the cell membrane. And if we fill that up with water, then that water inside of it would be the cytoplasm. So many years ago, the cytoplasm was thought to just be a watery liquid that all the other organelles floated within. But now we know through the use of electron microscopes that there are structures within the cytoplasm called the cytoskeleton. And what they do is form kind of like a spider web or a scaffold that holds the other organelles in place and keeps things from floating around where they shouldn't be. The cell membrane, of course, is kind of like the balloon, all right? And it is the outside shell of the cell. And if we wanted to have an analogy for the function of the cell membrane, it's kind of like the security guard at a building. And if the security guard has your name on the list of people that are allowed entrance into the building, the security guard will let you in and will also usher you out. But if you come in and you want to access to an apartment building and you're not supposed to be there, maybe you don't have the right swipe card or keys, or maybe your name isn't on the list, the security guard will boot you out and tell you, no, you are not allowed to come in. That is the role of the cell membrane. The cell membrane protects and keeps everything that's supposed to be in the cell inside the cell. And it also keeps everything that's supposed to be on the outside of the cell out of the cell, while at the same time allowing certain things to come in and come out. We call that selectively permeable. Only certain things are allowed in. An actual cell membrane would look a little bit like this. It would have two layers. It's made up of a combination of proteins and fats and carbohydrates. And there's different ways for things to access entry into the cell through the cell membrane, which we'll look at as a whole 3 or 4 different lessons. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on the cell membrane right now, but it's the outer shell. So if you looked at it under a transmission electron microscope in this picture, this line around the outside is what we would call the cell membrane. And if you have to diagram it or draw it, you would draw it on the outer shell. And then this is through a scanning electron microscope, and you can see the purple lines here going along, surrounding the nucleus, surrounding the nucleolus inside a cell. Cell membrane. We are going to leave it at that for lesson 1. There's a short assignment that goes along with the lesson for today. Thanks for paying attention. We're going to do part 2 tomorrow so that you don't have to listen to the videos all day long. So like I said, this PowerPoint is going to be posted with today's lesson, but you will need it for today, tomorrow, the next day, and the next day. And please don't forget to view the video, because some of the things that I've talked about today aren't on the PowerPoint, and you'll need that for the assignments. So thanks a lot. Have a good day and a great week learning about some science. Great job getting the microscope assignments in. I think that was our #1 assignment so far since school has been out. I think I have 20 out of 26 from your class have submitted those, so great job with that. I'll probably post an answer key, but maybe not, because most of you did really well on that. So have a great week, and I will see you tomorrow.